Good afternoon. My name is Kijala Shako. I work with Save the Children as the head of advocacy, campaigns, communication, and media for East and Southern Africa. And I'm your moderator for today. Welcome to Save Our Education, a side event during the high-level political forum co-hosted by the Government of Sierra Leone and Save the Children. We will be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on children's learning and well-being around the world, the challenges and some solutions, as well as new analysis from Save the Children and the recommendations. But before we start, I want to raise a few logistical things to be aware of. The first, due to the high number of participants in this webinar, all microphones and cameras are muted, and only the panelists can speak and show their video. All of you can write your questions in the Q&A, as well as contact the organizers via the chat. If you have a question for a specific presenter, please make that explicit when you're asking it. The recording of this webinar will be shared with all of you, alongside a copy of the report, media, and blogs later this week. We are thrilled to be able to run this webinar in Spanish, French, and English simultaneously. So to access the translation, please select your preferred language under the language interpretation option at the bottom of your screen or under the eplices in the smartphone app. As you're aware, school closure has been a central part of government response in controlling the spread of COVID-19 all over the world. Right now, there are still nearly 1 billion children affected by school closures. Distance learning isn't reaching every child, and there are big concerns that many children will never return and have fallen deeper into poverty, child labor, child marriage, and early pregnancy. And this emergency continues on top of an existing learning crisis, where already 258 million children and young people were out of school before the pandemic, around 1/6 of the global school-age population. If urgent action isn't taken now, we will be even further off track in meeting the Sustainable Development Goal in 2030. This session will highlight the need for the international community to come together to deliver tangible action and funding to ensure all children continue to learn while the schools are closed through inclusive distance learning, and they can return to school when it is safe to do so and build back better education systems as we go forward. The session will also highlight the need for coordinated action. So joining us today, we have a very distinguished panel of guests. First is Marley, a 16-year-old from Colombia. She's in her last year of school and participates in a project called Katutumbo Loves Education. She dreams of continuing to study political affairs to help her region, Katutumbo, and her country. We also have David Moinina Senge, who is Minister of Education for Sierra Leone. We have Maria Victoria Angulo, who is Minister of Education for Colombia. We have Daginge Ustein, who is Minister of International Development in Norway. We have Jaime Saavedra, Global Director of Education at the World Bank, and Kevin Watkins, who is the Chief Executive of Save the Children in UK. But first, we will see a short film.
أنا من قبل كنت مبسوط مع رفقاتي مع معلميني.
كنت إسكول كان عندنا جن محل عندنا نقولين جن جل مصلح جار جن.
تقريبا كل أطفال العالم عم بيعيشوا نفس الظروف.
Lo que más extraño es ir a la escuela.
لصاحبي اللي قاعد جنبي والأستاذ العربي كتير.
We can move on to the next part. And Marley, we will start with you. I'd like to start, Marley, by asking you if you could tell us a little about your experiences and the value being able to go to school and study has made in your life. Marley, please go ahead.
Hola, espero que todos estén bien, pues. En lo personal, la pandemia del COVID que está afectando en todo el mundo nos dio un giro total y ocasionó cambios drásticos tanto en cada nación como en cada persona, entre los cuales se encuentra la educación. Miles de niños, niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes se han visto obligados a adoptar un nuevo sistema de aprendizaje por medios virtuales que ha generado una variedad de controversias o dificultades a la hora de ejecutarlo o tomarlo como estrategia superior. Es cierto que por el momento es la única alternativa que hay frente a esta situación, mas sin embargo no podemos echar de lado las consecuencias y las afectaciones que en estos instantes está viviendo la niñez en Colombia, hablando desde un punto muy nacionalista, donde el método de aprendizaje virtual no está siendo eficaz, ni mucho menos está arrojando los resultados que el país y los gobernantes esperaban. Quiero ser muy puntual y concisa en decir que no se está aprendiendo lo suficiente, no se está ejecutando de la mejor manera, no se está entregando el interés y responsabilidad necesaria para poder cumplir el objetivo planteado desde inicio de pandemia. Además, es fatigante de que un niño o niña deba permanecer todo el día frente a un aparato electrónico para cumplir el rol de estudiante, lo cual podría traer consecuencias a largo plazo, donde afectaría especialmente la salud. Desde mi perspectiva como joven y estudiante, nuestro aprendizaje se está tornando muy básico. Aunque no podemos echarle la culpa a nadie, no se le puede quitar el mérito a adolescentes e instituciones que intentan hacer su mejor trabajo. Todas estas secuelas y afectaciones debilitan el bienestar de los niños, niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes, partiendo desde un punto educativo hasta llegar a un punto psicológico. Es difícil para un país como Colombia, donde todavía existen muchos retos para poder conseguir que los niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes vean cumplidos sus derechos, tener que atravesar todo el virus de la mejor manera, mas sin embargo, el Ministerio de Educación ha tomado unas medidas situadas como estrategias para poder sacar la educación adelante o intentarlo hacer. En efecto, tratando de innovar en su ámbito laboral y educativo, por el momento todo nuestro aprendizaje está girando alrededor de plataformas digitales como medio óptimo para llegar a la educación a un nivel más práctico. Bueno, esto para todos aquellos estudiantes que tienen la posibilidad de adquirir sus conocimientos y enseñanzas por medios electrónicos. Ahora les hablaré de cómo se la juegan las de las zonas rurales, especialmente el lugar en el que vivo, intentando hacerles a ustedes una pequeña ubicación geográfica de las regiones más vulnerables en cuanto a derechos de educación e incluso otros más en nuestro país colombiano. Colombia no está preparado para suministrar una educación tecnológica a todo el país y es algo que debería ser de sumo interés para todos los gobernantes que llevan las riendas del país. La importancia de que la niñez colombiana adquiera una educación de calidad sería a largo plazo y a la vez a corto plazo, pues la solución, y estoy segura que la más efectiva para poder quitarnos esas características feas que identifican a Colombia en parte, los niños, niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes son el presente y el futuro del mundo, y en la educación de estos mismos está el cambio que por siglo hemos querido conseguir. Pero los estados nacionales no se han querido dar cuenta de eso. Yo vivo en una zona llamada el Catatumbo. Es una región que por más de 50 años ha atravesado una guerra entre grupos al margen de la ley y el gobierno. Es un lugar en el que todavía hace falta unir fuerzas entre las instituciones, la sociedad civil y la ciudadanía, incluidas niñas, niños, jóvenes y adolescentes, en general para conseguir la paz y que la región y el país avance. Como ironía total, los más afectados en estos momentos son los niños, niñas, jóvenes y adolescentes, los cuales no tienen nada que ver ahí. Para el inicio viven en zonas veredales, donde el internet no llega, no se cuenta con una señal telefónica, los recursos económicos de muchas familias son muy bajos. El Ministerio de Educación ha optado por entregar guías físicas para todos estos niños, pero el acceso para que las familias obtengan estas actividades es muy difícil, ya que la distancia de las veredas a los cascos urbanos es bastante grande, sumándose que la gran proporción de padres de familia no saben leer. Así que imaginémonos cómo la educación para estos niños y niñas se torna muy difícil, lo que conlleva a que dejen las escuelas o colegios. En estos momentos muchos estudiantes han decidido abandonar el estudio. Yo opino que para poder cambiar esta situación tan drástica, se necesita primero que todo una preparación adecuada y satisfactoria por parte de los docentes en cuanto a las TIC, mejoras económicas para los niños y niñas que se encuentran en zonas veredales, pero que sinceramente lleguen a ellos, que ese dinero no se quede en el camino. Todos estos beneficios económicos podrían ser usados para libros, guías de aprendizaje, internet, entre otros, para la educación de calidad que tanto esperamos tener. Además, le sugeriría al gobierno una toma de datos confiable de todos los jóvenes que no cuentan con la posibilidad de adquirir una educación superior por falta de dinero. Las ayudas serían muy en el ámbito educativo. Por último, les hablo con mucho respeto y sugerencia para que en Colombia el Estado dirija su mirada y se fije en la niñez de Colombia. No nos dejen por fuera. En su momento se han intentado solucionar problemas en distintos sectores, pero ¿qué está pasando con la educación de calidad que se debe brindar? Sé y reconozco que es difícil, pero es un trabajo colectivo que generará ganancias generales. Dejemos de estar pensando y solo preferir el bien propio. Luchemos y esforcémonos un poco más, solo un poco. Demostremos que los colombianos somos luchadores y los gobernantes de nuestro país más que nadie saben eso. El que la voz de la niñez sea escuchada es un punto clave, tanto para el Estado como para la misma en sí, ya que ambos van a salir beneficiados y ese es el objetivo. Los niños y niñas por fin serán atendidos y su opinión será tomada en cuenta para cada decisión. Y tenemos por otro lado al gobierno, el cual debe velar por los derechos de los mismos y qué más estratégico e inteligente que escuchar a las mismas víctimas, las cuales les darán la posible solución a esa vulnerabilización que se está cometiendo. La voz de la niñez tiene fuerza y lo vamos a demostrar. Gracias.
Hey, you're on mute.
Kevin, let me come next to you. Yesterday, Save the Children launched a new report, Save Our Education, which includes some new analysis on lost learning and the potential drop in finances for education, unless governments commit to maintaining their education budget. Please, could you tell us about Save the Children's response to the crisis and what the new report is telling us we need to do? Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Kajala, and a really big thank you to Mali as well for that very powerful opening to this conference. I think the first rule of speaking at a conference, including video conference, is never get the slot after a brilliant, energetic, articulate young advocate, which Mali is. But I want to maybe start by saying that I think this is really one of the most important reports that we've ever done in Save the Children. And it's one of the most important campaigns that we've ever led. And I say that because of the sheer scale of the crisis and the stakes for so many children around the world. And on the opening slide, there are two young children whose stories are told in the report. Maya, who is a Syrian refugee living in Zatari camp in Lebanon, and Nasir from the Somali region of Ethiopia. These are the children whose futures are at stake. They understand the importance of education for themselves, for their future. And it's really so critical that we act in solidarity with them to address this crisis. And I wanted to start actually with their pictures and with their story, because there are so many statistics around on the impact of COVID. But in the end, this comes down to the individual stories and the life chances of desperately vulnerable children. Now, we currently have over 1 billion children who are still out of school. This is unprecedented. We have never, as an international community, faced a crisis on this scale. We've had school closures after earthquakes, like the earthquake in northern Pakistan in 2005. We've had school closures during conflict. We have never had a global school closure of the type that we're dealing with now. And for children who are on the wrong side of the digital divide, for children who are living in lockdown in poverty, in malnutrition in some cases, for children who are facing violence in the home, for children who are maybe first generation learners whose parents are illiterate and are unable to help them with their schoolwork. This is really catastrophic. And to give one analogy, that when the earthquake happened in Pakistan, schools were closed for about 3 months. But when the learning effects were studied many years later, it was found that children who were closest to the fault line had lost 1.5 years of schooling. Now, if you imagine that outcome on a global scale, that is what we're dealing with. And I think we just have to be very clear about what the stakes are. This is fundamentally about the right of millions of children around the world to education, but it's about so much more than education, because we know that when children lose their opportunity for education, they lose an opportunity to escape poverty because of the impact that it has on their prospects for employment and for earning later in life. We know that when young girls are denied the right to an education, it has implications for their life chances in so many areas, their chances of escaping early marriage, of realizing their potential, of having greater control over their own lives. And what is true for individuals is also true for countries, that if we don't address this crisis with the urgency that it demands, whole countries will face the prospect of their human capital base being eroded, of their prospects for inclusive growth being dented, and this will act as a very powerful handbrake on progress towards the 2030 goals in many areas: child survival, maternal health, and other areas too. So a few remarks on some of the new findings that are in the report. The first one is an estimate that we have of the potential number of children who will never go back to school as a result of this crisis. And this is derived from the poverty effects of COVID-19. And we estimate that almost 10 million children are now in very immediate risk of not going back to school, of being out of education forever. The vulnerability index, which we set out in the report, which assesses vulnerability on the basis of existing out of school numbers, on the gender divide in education. There are 12 countries, many of them conflict affected, where those risks are particularly high. And I think this is an underreported aspect of the crisis, which is the combination of recession, economic slowdown, reduced revenues for government, and budget resources being channeled into other areas. We could see at least $77 billion taken out of education over the next 18 months. So at precisely the moment that we should be investing more in education, we face the risk of resources being taken out of education. And this will really hamper our efforts to deal with the 3 core challenges as we set them out in this report, which I really encourage all of you to read. The first challenge is keeping learning alive. Now, in Save the Children, we're working with partners and governments across many countries in the world, running radio programs, distance learning programs, outreach programs with communities. To give you one example, we're reaching over 500,000 South Sudanese refugee children with radio programs and with learning materials. We're working very actively across Ethiopia, across Pakistan, across many other countries. But in the end, I think all of us have to do absolutely everything we can to keep the flame of hope that comes with learning alive in the homes of these desperately vulnerable children. That is the first order priority. Second priority is to prepare for a safe and meaningful return to school. We know even before this crisis started, as you set out, Kajala, 258 million children were already out of school. Even worse than that, half of the children who were in school will finish their primary school unable to read a single sentence. Now, this is actually an opportunity to carry out learning assessments when children go back and to invest in the accelerated learning programs that will provide them with the education they need. Third priority, if I could go to the next slide, is building back for a better recovery. Now, this is going to take investment. We can debate how resources can be most efficiently deployed, but without a very significant expansion of resources for education, all bets are off on recovery and on the right to education for millions of children. We argue in the report for a supplementary budget for the International Development Association of the World Bank, the facility that supports the poorest countries, of 35 billion over 2 years, 10 billion of which we believe should be in grants. We argue for support for the financing facility for education and other loan guarantee mechanisms that would enable governments and multilateral lenders to leverage their balance sheet to tap in to cheap, low interest credit blended in the right way with grants to open up education for millions of children, to fully fund the fantastic work that the Education Cannot Wait partnership is doing and the Global Partnership for Education, and to do something about debt. This is a moment for the world to take a stand. The 74 poorest countries in the world are currently scheduled to spend 45 billion on debt over the next year. Now, we have the debt suspension initiative, which the World Bank and the IMF have led, but it's critical that we now convert these debt liabilities into investments in children. And the next graph will show you why this is so important. If you could just go to the next graph. This essentially charts, you can see the line running from top to bottom. That is the line of equivalence between the debt service obligations of countries and the debt service spending that they will provide to creditors. And you can see that many countries are scheduled to spend far more repaying debt than they are on than they're planning to spend on education. That is just wrong. That is a violation of the rights of children to education. We're calling in the report for private creditors to join this initiative. We cannot put the credit claims of sovereign bondholders in Europe, of private commercial banks, before the claims and the rights of children to education. That's why this debt initiative is so important. Final slide. We set out in the report what we believe is a credible, practical, and ambitious agenda for change. We have to start with a global action plan for education that recognizes the urgency and the severity of what's at stake. We need to commit to the investments. We need to gear education systems towards opportunities for learning as children come back into school. We need to provide a protected environment for children that will keep them out of early marriage, out of child labor, and social protection and cash transfers can play an important part in doing that. And we need to monitor and track delivery. When you look at what is happening with COVID, we can track the devastating consequences of the disease itself in the number of people who are infected, in the tragedy of the number of people who are dying. We can track the economic impact on recession, on public debt, and on growth and employment. We need to start tracking the education impact as though they really count. This is about the lives of children, about the future of a generation. Let us not allow that generation to be sacrificed on the altar of an international community that was too indifferent, too lacking in resolve, too lacking in ambition to make the difference where it was needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that reminder that we need, even under these current circumstances, to protect a generation of children. Minister Senge, I'll come to you next. Sierra Leone experienced the devastating Ebola pandemic in 2015-2016, and school closures were also used at that time to prevent the spread of the virus. What lessons learned from that crisis have you acted upon during the COVID-19 education crisis? And what kind of innovative interventions are you exploring now to ensure that all children, particularly the most at risk of not returning to school, such as girls, have access to distance learning and do return when it's safe to do so? Welcome, Minister Senge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank Save the Children for co-hosting this event with us in the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, and in particular, the Save the Children country head, Heather Campbell, and her team for ensuring that we have a great collaboration. Now, as you indicated, we have about 2.6 million children in Sierra Leone that have been affected by the school closures. And this number obviously has grown over the last 2 years since we started our free quality school education program, which was focused on increasing the number of people who come to school by now providing fee subsidies for everybody from pre-primary all the way to senior secondary school. So we had this issue to deal with, and then COVID happened. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that we met our team, the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, a lot of the people who were there to respond to Ebola are still there. And we did a couple of things. We immediately set up a task force. We set up an emergency education task force with our main partners, with UNICEF, with World Bank, with EU, and Save the Children, and the not big 5 NGOs or international agencies that we have. And that task force had 4 pillars. We were focused on communication, and the communication that was important for us, that we will engage communities and homes and families and chiefs about girls not getting pregnant. Because we know that during Ebola, many girls got pregnant and many did not come back to school. Now, this was important because a week before we closed down schools, Cabinet and the President of Sierra Leone reversed the ban on pregnant girls from attending school. So then we had to be proactive in our engagement. We also had a pillar that focused on distance learning. And the distance learning one was something that also we picked up from Ebola period when we started the education radio. And the education radio this time was then revamped with the Teaching Service Commission. And one of the things that's been fascinating in terms of innovation is that we'll continue to develop new content. For example, we added music and meditation to our radio teaching program because we believe that this was important for learning. And we then have a third pillar on schools reopening and readiness. Now, I mentioned we have 2.6 million children, but only 400,000 exams this year. We have 3 transition exams in primary school, in basic junior secondary school, and then senior secondary school to transition to universities. It's important for us that in a safe way, our children can continue learning and be given the opportunity to transition. So we quickly, in all of this, we communicate effectively. So we communicated 2 weeks before schools closed. We communicated and engaged partners way before schools reopened. And schools reopened, and we ensured that there was training for teachers, training for guidance counseling. We provided all the support so that schools can safely reopen. And the 4th pillar was on operations and policy and planning. Now, it's important that even as we have this crisis, we're developing policies and are planning for reopening, as Kevin was just intimating that we are developing innovative policies that are very inclusive. Now, primarily people who are usually left out, I like to think that my team is leading on the whole inclusion and radical inclusion. We have concepts called radical inclusion and comprehensive safety. But even at that, Mali is right, because in our own blind spot and as a radio teaching program, we did not think about kids who were deaf. We did not think about kids who may not be able to access those solutions that we have. At the same time, we were thinking about hybrid systems. We were thinking about online TV learning, paper-based to inclusion. But even as we try to be fully inclusive, unless we get as many different people on board, we may be not aware of our blind spots. In terms of partner, the PPE, World Bank, we just recently got a support grant from World Bank, which is just about to start, and we're working with, we're hoping to work with an NGO consortium. Now, one of the things that I would like to conclude with is that, yes, we've been able to use and learn a lot from our experience during Ebola. And yes, we've been engaging our partners, international partners and NGOs and children. And I go to schools myself to make sure that things are happening. We have a monitoring team. But we still miss out some things. We still miss out some things. And it's important for us as leaders in education that even when we're trying our best, we remain consultative and we have an open door policy. Now, to conclude, I do want to say to keep learning alive and to respond better in a more inclusive and appropriate way. We must look to developing country partners, because those country partners have already been developing solutions on the edge of inclusion, on the edge of connectivity, on the edge of remote learning. So this is not an instance that we expect unidirectional flow to better prepare and to better ensure that learning happens well and we achieve SDG4 goals. Now is when we have to enhance our global partnership and double down on our investments. And that's what we as a government are committed to doing in Sierra Leone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Senge, for that important reminder that for us to keep education going, we need to think about radical inclusion, continuous innovation, collaboration, and more specifically, constantly thinking around how we can double the investment in ensuring that children not only stay in school, safely in school, and those who are out of school at the right time return safely to school. Minister Angulo, I'll turn to you now. Colombia has taken a leading role in adopting an open borders policy and implementing a lot of good practice in the provision of education, health and employment services, and humanitarian assistance to Venezuelan migrants. How has the COVID-19 crisis impacted your ability to provide an education to Colombian as well as migrant children? Welcome, Minister Angulo. You might be on mute, Minister Angulo. As we wait for Minister Angulo to connect, Minister Austin, I'll come to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Norway is a big supporter of global education. Please tell us your overall reflections on the Save Our Education report and the recommendations that we are making. What is Norway doing to respond given the unprecedented crisis on children's learning? Minister Austin, please. Welcome. Minister Austin, I suspect you're on mute. We can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
Okay, you probably hear me better now. That's good.
Yes,
thank you so much.
You.
Yeah, thank you again. It's just a privilege for us to joining you today. And again, thank you, Mara, for the very clear and strong message that you gave us from the very beginning. And I think you addressed it so good when it comes to giving access and the importance of children and young people to actually seek the solutions in the midst of this crisis that we are in the midst of again, and also to see not only the possibilities, but also the challenges when it comes to distance learning. And I think you gave us some very good examples on that. And again, I would like to highlight what you mentioned, the most needed people to reach the furthest behind first, as the Secretary General said in last year's high political level forum last year. I think it's so important, and also from the Norwegian government side. So again, thank you for addressing that in the beginning of this important meeting. So again, the coronavirus, as already mentioned, is changing the world, but it's not changing our commitment to eradicating extreme poverty by the end of this decade. And it's not altering our conviction that education is one of the main pathways towards getting there and to reaching all the Sustainable Development Goals. The virus hit us as we were about to step up our efforts and embark upon the decade of action. As already said, 1.6 billion girls and boys were sent home from schools. And school can close down, but learning must never stop. All children have a right to education, regardless of whether school buildings are open or closed. And rather than putting learning on hold until this crisis is over, education must be part of our first line of defense against the virus. I would like to thank Save the Children for initiating this event in the margins of the high-level political forum. And I'm also grateful for the Save Our Education report that came out. And it contains exactly what we need right now. Crucial examples of how distance learning solutions can alleviate the impact of the pandemic, and on how we can prepare for schools to reopen once it's safe to do so. Education is also a main tool for providing children and youth with knowledge about hygiene and social distancing, which are key measures to stop the spread of COVID-19. And again, the pandemic is not a single crisis. What began as local disease outbreak has evolved into a global health emergency and a global economic recession. And it has triggered the most dramatic education disruption of our lifetime. And I think the report highlights that many of the most marginalized children live in areas affected by crisis and conflict, as just said. In humanitarian crisis, children and adolescents who are out of school are more exposed to recruitment by armed groups, forced labor, and early marriage. And to be honest, last year when I visited Mali, listening to the heartbreaking stories of children who had been forced to leave their villages made it so incredibly clear to me what a decisive role education is playing in their lives, and even more so during a crisis. Education offers protection and equips young people with knowledge and skills to cope during a crisis. Last year, Norway committed more than $50 million over 3 years to the Global Fund for Education in Emergency. Education cannot wait. And we did it because it cannot wait. I'm pleased to see that our contribution has enabled Education Cannot Wait to respond swiftly and efficiently to the current education crisis. And we will be facing challenging when it comes to priorities in the time ahead. I think that's so for all governments all around the globe right now. But I can assure you that Norway will do our part to ensure that education has a key role, both in immediate COVID-19 response and in building back better. It is more important than ever that global education actors come together to coordinate efforts and make the best possible use of each other's comparative advantages. UNESCO has taken a lead role in the COVID-19 response by establishing the Global Education Coalition, now consisting of more than 100 member organizations. And we must address macroeconomic challenges as well as the economic plight of ordinary people, and in particular the most vulnerable ones. So Norway has actually increased our efforts to combat child labor and other forms of modern slavery, and this will be complementary to other programs and efforts when it comes to education. There is no way we can reach the 2030 goals if we leave anyone behind. Again, dear friends, I really think that schools are where young people prepare for a meaningful future, where they enable themselves to take up a job and care for their families, and perhaps even start businesses and create jobs for others. Together with health, nutrition, good governance, and strong civil society and access to renewable energy, education leads to the best and most long-lasting kinds of development. The sustainable development, the growth that governments and citizens create themselves. And that is why Norway has increased, actually double our aid for education globally since 2013. And that is why this crisis is also an opportunity to strengthen the global educational architecture and our ability to deliver on our promise of education to all throughout this pandemic and beyond. So that was the remarks from my side. Again, thank you for giving us space and be a part of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Osteen, for that reminder that education is the first line of defense in terms of protecting the rights of children, and even more importantly, the strength of student voices. I think Mali has clearly demonstrated to us that young people, children do know what they want, and they must be part of the solutions that we are seeking. And that if we are going to get to the ambitions we have by 2030, we must definitely leave no one behind. Minister Angulo, are you back online? We can then move to Mr. Jaime Saavedra, Global Director of Education at the World Bank. Our analysis shows us, Jaime, that national education budgets in low and middle income countries are likely to be significantly reduced as a result of the pandemic on overall government income and potential reprioritization towards other sectors. What is your message to governments facing these decisions? And how is the World Bank responding to COVID-19 education emergency? What are your reflections on the recommendations for the World Bank in Save Our Education report? Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
So I just want to emphasize some of the points that Kevin was mentioning about the magnitude of this crisis, because I'm not sure that we have all internalized, how we're living the largest shock to the global education system in modern history. We have never lived a double shock like this, in which in order to fight the pandemic, we have a huge and very long school closures and then a huge economic crisis. We have lived both types of shocks, but never have lived those two shocks at the same time and in all countries in the world. And 5 months ago, we would have had this seminar, we would have already been saying that we were living a learning crisis, right? That countries were not moving fast in terms of making sure that we were going to be attaining the SDG 4 targets by 2030. We were not in the path of giving the right quality of education to all children in primary and secondary education. And now with this crisis, countries might be driven off track to achieve those learning poverty goals. And as I said, I'm not sure that all societies have internalized the magnitude of this shock. Kevin was already mentioning the number of children that might not go to school, right? That might be close to 10 million children. And we need to remember that girls are 2.5 times more likely to drop out from school than boys. One economic calculation we have done is that the school closures and the unfolding economic shock could on average reduce yearly earnings for each student of today's generation by $16,000 in net present value, right? And if we put together what that amounts for this generation, we're talking about that this generation of students stand to lose an estimated $10 trillion of earnings in their lifetime, which is close to 8% of global GDP. So that is a huge number. And remember that this is the generation that will have to pay the debt in which all countries are incurring today in order precisely to fight the pandemic, right? And in addition to this, we have all the mental health impacts and child labor impacts, right? That that have already been described. But one thing that I wanted to say is that there are two sides of the coin, right? Education is clearly a victim of the pandemic, but it's also part of the solution, right? And is an essential factor of the equation that defines our future. In the short run, right, a very careful and safe return to school, balancing the health concerns with the needs to give children as fast as we can the support and safe space to grow and thrive, that is the school, is critical. So we need to work faster the way, and Minister Senge has mentioned some of the features of how trying to return us to school as fast as we can is critical. But also, in addition to what we need to do in the short run, we must seize this opportunity to reimagine education in really bold ways. And as I was saying in another occasion, the new normal that sometimes we talk about might be underestimating the magnitude of the change we need. There's not a lot of the old normal that we want to maintain, right? So we need radical, we need transformational change. Many times we spoke about the school of the future. We have been talking about that, a school that is more resilient, more equitable, more personalized. But I think that future has come sooner, propelled by COVID-19. And I think that bringing that education to today is possible because many of the investments that are being made today, right now, in education technology, in order to try to help kids like the one that I'm seeing there in the screen now, those investments in radio, in TV contact, in remote training of teachers, like what Sierra Leone, like what Colombia are trying to do now, can serve as a launch pad, right, for a more personalized, a more resilient way of providing education. I think this is possible, right, because parents are now understanding better the role, teachers are understanding, and societies, and teachers are understanding better the role, and societies are understanding better the crucial role that teachers have. With this clear understanding now by everyone that really education is a social experience, hence the critical importance of teachers. Mass media is understanding what the role is. So there might be a changing perception of the different players that can lead us to a better education system. But this, as you were saying, this will require resources, and this will require financial resources, and we need a better internalization by the macro financial complex that the solution to giving the right education to everyone is not an issue of the education sector, it's an issue of the whole society and the whole economy. So clearly, we need to be creative, and as Kevin was explaining, right, or find different mechanisms so that more international resources, right, can flow to countries in order to support education. But at the same time, at the country level, which is where most of the expenditures happen, right? What matters actually is always what happens at the country level, right? Is that we on one hand protect education budgets, right, and also invest in the capacity of ministers of education and ministers of health and other ministries that have to do with the provision of education, that they are as efficient as possible in order to spend resources. So we need both things. We will need more resources, and we'll need to spend them as better and as efficient as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for that insight and the invitation for us to radically reimagine education, I think linked to what Minister Jaime was talking about earlier, thinking about how to reimagine it radically, how to be more transformative, how to have radical inclusion. but also reminding us that financial investment must be accompanied by efficient, equitable, and transparent expenditure. Minister Angulo, welcome back. We're really excited to hear more from the experiences of Colombia, which has taken a leading role in adopting a very inclusive and open borders policy, implementing good practices in the provision of education, health and employment services, as well as humanitarian assistance to Venezuelan migrants. Please tell us how COVID-19 has impacted your ability to provide an education to Colombian as well as migrant children. Welcome, Minister Angulo.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important event. Thank you, Save the Children, and a greeting for Marley, that is a Colombian girl that have an excellent resume about the challenge of education. In light of the pandemic, as you can see in the next slides, we have developed strategies such as education platforms, radio and television channels, providing computers for the most vulnerable, continuing our school nutrition program at home, giving support resources to the most vulnerable students, and generating networks between teachers, principals, and parents. On the other hand, as you can see in the next slide, we have been working guidelines to establish the conditions for a gradual and progressive return to school. So we are analyzing the context of every region to establish the pathway to progressive generate conditions with biosecurity measures and take into account the pandemic evolution. In higher education, as you can see in the next slide, we also identify the importance of giving financial support to students and institutions to mitigate the dropout effect. We also developed the Plan Padrino. It's like a strategy to creative solution and generate capacity in digital transformation and work around well-being measures, such as support for students, teachers, to strengthen their emotional and mental development. All of this shows that this pandemic had invited us to double our efforts to mitigate impacts on equity regarding access and quality. Among our education agenda in Colombia, priorities are reducing dropout rates, understanding the lags and gaps in the learning process, work around socio-emotional skills, and build resilient school. The question is, how can maximize the efforts to come out stronger of this sector? The first one is clear that education, digital platforms, and radio and television are here to stay, that have been fundamental tools during the adaptation phase. Will continue having a key role. Digital transformation is an opportunity for the education system to reach different places in different formats, understanding there are different learning styles and complemented class education room. Other important lessons is recognize this situation has a possibility to build on the close experience between family and education sector. On the other hand, we must innovate and design evaluation mechanisms to be used by a school to identify the gaps and create leveling strategies. It's also necessary policies and strategies for teachers and principals with quality tools and materials to support them in their work and establish network highlight the transformative power of education leaders and schools. This zone has also made evident the need and the opportunity to improve education infrastructure and connectivity, not only to comply with the sanitary measures, but also to improve learning environments. Finally, the resource investment in education, specifically in these areas, will be key in the coming years, as well as other social development strategies and all the financial support we can give the most vulnerable families to make a successful, gradual, and progressive return to school, and guarantee for this generation the access and quality education, give support to children and young people to achieve complete educational trajectories, and work to reduce inequalities which have been increased with this pandemic. Regarding the specific point or specific question about attention to migrant in Colombian school population, it's important to say that which apply to all children living in Colombia territory. The education sector has been aware for our region migration crisis since 2015, given the constant incremental inflow of migrant population of our country. One of the first actions we developed was the flexibilization and documentation-based requirements for entry to a school of foreign students coming from Venezuela. That has allowed us to guarantee access, well-being, and continuity to around 346,000 Venezuelan students among our data you can see in this slide. The Ministry of Education has also put in place a plan that combines coverage, quality, within the welcome, well-being, and continuous strategy, including actions such as active searching, effective enrollment, capacity building, in intersectoral coordination, teacher training, infrastructure, school food provision, transportation, and school equipment. It's also important to mention that we are strengthening strategies to provide them with the psychosocial support they need to help them integrate effectively to Colombian environments. In terms of lesson learned and recommendation, has been a valuable opportunity in terms to capacity building for mobilizing social sector, promote solidarity, create institutional adjustment relating to flexibility and opens regarding social structures and social and cultural development. To close this presentation, I want to show you a short video of how children are taking now in Colombia of the return to school.
Yo soy Charlie y vengo aquí para contarles los lineamientos, o dicho en otras palabras, las sugerencias que nos hace el gobierno para un gran regreso a clases. ¡Qué emoción! Recuerden que esto es paso a paso, como una tortuga. Es lento, pero cada paso que da lo hace muy cuidadosa y rigurosamente. Y debemos seguir muy cuidadosamente los lineamientos de prevención sanitaria, como ponerse el tapabocas, lavarse las manos, mantenerse a 2 metros de distancia, pero estos son solo unos pequeños ejemplos. Pero tranquilo, que tus amigos te estarán esperando. ¡Chao!
Thank you, Minister Angulo, for your insights. And I think some of the things that step out for me is looking at how to support teachers and principals of different schools with additional capacity, additional tools. I'd seen a comment in the Q&A, someone saying what kind of support is being offered to teachers and school administration. You're also emphasizing the need for us as we go back safely to school to keep improving education infrastructure, technology connectivity, but even more continuing to focus exclusively and prioritize the vulnerable families. And thank you as well for sharing how Colombia is being even more inclusive in terms of ensuring that all children within the borders of Colombia are able to access education. I want to thank all the speakers at this point. Participants, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. We are seeing them. and we will try to get to as many as possible. I want to now invite a couple of interventions from representatives of the governments of Canada and the UK. First, I want to invite Kamal Khera, Permanent Secretary to the Ministry of International Development, Global Affairs, Canada. Welcome, Kamal.
Thank you, and I hope that you can hear me fine. Thank you for this opportunity once again to be out with you today. Save the Children Canada has been a key partner for us for more than 30 years, so we appreciate the opportunity to join you for the launch of Save the Children's Global Report on Education. Under Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, access to quality, inclusive, and girls' education are key priorities, and ensuring education for refugees and displaced persons, particularly girls, is significant for Canada. The COVID-19 pandemic, as has been mentioned, has disrupted lives around the world and threatens to roll back gains that have been made on almost all sustainable development goals, including education. That's why we appreciate the opportunity to share global policy and funding practices and to see and discuss what can be done. Canada will continue to support global efforts to prioritize continuity of learning for all. This means reaching the most marginalized people by providing range of high and low tech activities that ensure students can continue to learn. We support the development of school reopening plans that are inclusive and ensure all children and youth have access to safe, quality education. We applaud those refugee hosting countries that have made the commitment to include refugees in their education sector and school reopening plans. And it is particularly important for Canada to ensure that this includes children who were out of school before the pandemic, such as refugees and displaced children, girls, and learners with disability. For example, Canada is supporting Save the Children's Canada's Beyond Border project, which is working with the Colombia-Venezuela border to enhance access to much needed educational opportunities for out-of-school children, which is why we're calling for global support to act urgently to ensure the right to education is fulfilled during and after pandemic, and that all refugee and displaced children can get the education that they need and deserve. And perhaps I'll end with a question to our panelists. As has been mentioned, Save Our Children report estimates 9.7 million children may never go back to school after the COVID-19 pandemic. And Save the Children is calling for governments and donors to respond to this global educational emergency by urgently investing in education. What more do you think needs to be done to address the particular needs of the most marginalized, including refugees and displaced children, girls, and learners with disabilities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamal, for that reminder that we still must integrate all out-of-school children during and even after COVID-19. Alicia Herbert, Head of Education, Children and Youth at DFID. I'm welcoming your intervention now. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this event this afternoon. First, I'd like to start by taking the opportunity to thank Save the Children for this excellent report. Not only does it present us with a comprehensive set of recommendations, but it also provides us with a very timely and rich set of resources to help us to understand more about the impact of COVID-19 has had on education. And I'm really grateful for events like these because they help us to raise the profile of education and this emergency, this education emergency that we are facing, that Marley elaborated on from her own personal experience and children in Colombia, as well as Jaime talking about the impact, the global impact of this, the economic impact. And indeed from the education ministers that we've had from Colombia and from Sierra Leone today, talking about the challenge that they face in their particular countries, the scale and the depth of that challenge. Now, what has DFID been up to, the UK government, over the course of the past few months in response to this crisis? So over the course of the past 3 months, we have adapted and reprioritized our education programs in 18 countries to support education systems and to keep pupils safe. In places like Sierra Leone, for example, Our focus has been on remote radio learning, safe spaces for vulnerable children, community and mass media messaging on hygiene. In South Sudan, we have, in addition to the distance learning, we have increased the size of the cash transfers to girls to help sustain them and their families and encourage them to return to school. We've funded an uplift into Education Cannot Wait and to UNICEF to respond to COVID-19. Our education technology hub, which we fund jointly with the World Bank and with the Gates Foundation, has also been responding. And indeed, we've been exceptionally supportive of the Global Partnership for Education and the work that it's doing to respond to the global education crisis. And just yesterday, Baroness Sugg, who, as you know, is the UK's girls' education envoy, announced an additional 5.3 million of new funding going to UNHCR to enable more than 5,000 teachers to provide vital education for children in 10 refugee hosting countries over the next 7 months, a very, very crucial period. This will ensure that children can continue to benefit from education during the school closures, and will mean teachers can provide vital outreach to get children back to school once they are safe to do so and once they are open. Jaime and others touched on, and indeed the report touched on funding. And it's not only are we facing an education crisis and an education emergency, but also looking ahead, given where we are with respect to a global recession. It's probably not the time, it isn't the time for us to be pulling back in terms of education funding. Jaime pointed out the real effort that's required internationally to continue to support education. So did Kevin, also pointing to the need to protect education budgets in country where, that is where we know that the vast majority of spend on education is actually domestic spend on education. We as the UK government, as you know, we are major supporters of Education Cannot Wait, of the Global Partnership for Education. But I think given that we are in unprecedented times, we also need different and creative and different types of ways in which we will fund education moving forward. And it is within that context that I think it is absolute a priority for us to fund the International Financing Facility for Education, which will generate, or which has the potential to generate $4 now for every additional dollar that is actually put in. This is recommended in the report, and I certainly urge all donors to actually come on board with IFED. It's a way to to leverage financing. It's a way to respond, a very potent way to respond to the financing gap that we're likely to face in the global education sector. In addition to the financing piece, we know that, and as Jaime and others have suggested, we also need to reimagine and to rethink what education is going to look like moving forward. Even before the pandemic, a number of children were out of school, hundreds of millions of children out of school, and many hundreds of millions of children not hitting the sort of learning targets that we would expect. So there's a real need now and an incredible opportunity for us to reimagine education moving forward. And I think given that, I will just end with a question for the panel as well. Given these unprecedented times, given the need for us to reimagine education, to rethink the way in which we approach this, I have a specific question with respect to girls. The British government is very, very much focused, very much committed to girls' education, to 12 years of quality education for all girls around the world. And I just want to ask about, what are those policies, interventions and plans we need to put in place now in order to ensure that girls do return to school? Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. I've picked up on two things from your talking points. One, it's really exciting to hear how DFID has adapted and reprioritized its education programming across those 18 countries. And the second exciting thing for me that stands out is linked to your last question around looking at child-sensitive social protection, and in this case, specifically targeting girls as one of the ways of mitigating negative coping mechanisms. We want to move to the questions that have been raised, and Marley, I know you have a question, so we'll allow you to go first before I start to flag some of the questions that have come up from the participants. Welcome, Marley.
Muchas gracias. Mi pregunta va directamente a la ministra Angulo de Colombia. ¿Cree usted, ministra, que la metodología educativa que se está aplicando ahora es la suficientemente asertiva para lograr un cambio sustancial en el país?
Thank you, Marley. I'll just flag a few more. The first one is to Minister Senga. Just hearing about your vision for revolutionizing the education system. What are some of the approaches that you're going to take to ensure that sustainable budget solutions are found to ensure that all children, and particularly the most vulnerable, are able to access quality education? But for all of you as well, just to also ask, what are you doing intentionally to listen to children, hear their concerns, and involve them in education issues that affect them as part of your response? So Minister Senga, those will be two for you. To Ministers Ulstein and Angulo as well, what are you doing to involve children? But also, what are you doing to support teachers who are a critical part of the education response in this crisis, but who are also experiencing lockdowns, may not have access to resources or support for their own well-being? What are your governments doing to listen to children, and secondly, to support teachers? A question to Jaime at the World Bank. Our participants want to know that countries are addressing this crisis in different ways. What are some examples, and how is the World Bank supporting them at the country level? This will be in addition to what you already shared. And finally, to you, Kevin, what are we doing to engage children, but also how do we ensure that education systems and teachers plan for the safe return to school, that parents and children have the trust needed to feel comfortable to return, and what interventions should be taken to ensure that children can catch up on lost learning? What are we doing at Save the Children to support education authorities and organizations to prepare for the return to school? So I think I'll give each of you 2 minutes to just wrap up and respond to what our participants want to hear from you. I'll start with you, Minister Senge.
Thank you very much. Marley, as you were speaking, I sent a text message to some of my friends to say, who are the young activists in Sierra Leone that we have, because I want to meet with them. So thank you for inspiring all of us into action. When I usually go to classrooms, I do that often. I enter the class and maybe the students are confused because maybe they don't know who's in the class, and I immediately say sit down, and I start by saying, do you have any questions? And sometimes before they know who I am, they do have questions. But if, say, the teacher goes, oh, do you know who you're speaking to? It's the minister, and I said, do you have any questions? Then everybody goes quiet. And so my way of engaging with the young people, particularly, is to go to the classroom and not even allow for them to stand up to be like, good afternoon, blah, blah, blah. I just immediately engage them and say, what questions do you have? But to the question you asked about how to keep this sustainable, I think we're doing two things. One is digitization and data. Lucky for me, I'm also the Chief Innovation Officer for Sierra Leone, and I do primarily believe that when we digitize and when we use data, it will be the most inclusive we can get, because then you lose the tendency to forget people. If you ensure that every pupil in your class is biometrically registered, everyone, so it's not just those who are in the city, then you ensure that you're tracking their progress from class 1 all the way to when they finish your secondary school. You're better prepared to not let anyone be left behind. And so I do truly believe that the way we make some of these solutions possible is universal digitization and data. And finally, in terms of policy and with girls and the incentives for going back, actually at Cabinet tomorrow, I'm discussing an incentive for girls to come back to school, and our team is ready. So I have a progressive set of colleagues who are very open to listening to us talk about policies that bring and include girls. And that means we have to put it on paper. We have to invest money in it and put commitments to it. And that's what happens when you have these cabinet papers. So my approach has been, these are all good ideas, and I put them on paper and I submit it to cabinets and get the endorsements of everybody, and then it guarantees local domestic investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Senge. I'll come to you next, Minister Angulo, followed by Minister Olstein. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions and recognition of Marley's excellent intervention. For the first question, in this specific situation, given the confinement measures in place, we have been especially strict to maintain communication challenge. However, through constant dialogue with the Ministry of Education, with the Secretary of Education, heads, teachers, parent association, we have reiterated the importance of listening to the concerns, needs, and opinions, taking them into consideration while implementing measures and strategies that is very important in this moment. Some examples were interaction with family and students. We have been integrate and participate action with the students to agree on strategies to verify compliance with the biosecurity measures and the reopening phase strategies related with the program Alliance, School and Family, and the importance we have been giving the interaction and dialogue with family and students. For the second question, that is around teachers, teacher training has always been, and especially now, one of the most important issues for us. So we have put diverse strategies in place. On the other hand, we create Contacto Maestro, is the name in Spanish, an exclusive platform for teachers and head teachers with the section Connect, Take Care, Transform, and Inspire. Here they can find different quality tools and materials to continue strengthening their work and academic development, and leadership school for pedagogical leadership and administrative management. It also has a resource bank with digital education materials. Additionally, with the Connect session, we have strengthened the communication ties between government and teachers and their participation in policy, strategies, and measures with the have been permanent construction. For the last question, to Marley question, first of all, I want to know that through the constant and articulate work and communication of the Ministry with Secretary of Education and different authorities, we have constant update data regarding the implementation of the learning modalities through the country. National printed materials are being used by 86% in rural areas and 69% in urban areas. Education, television, and radio, but 18% in rural areas and 90% in urban areas. And finally, digital platforms, by 50% in rural areas. Looking beyond short-term answer, the emergency had led us to ask ourselves, how can maximize the efforts we have put in place and the lessons we are learning to come out to strengthen sector, our sector. Finally, Marley, I think that we must work most hard to try to improve this education and quality education and platforms and radio and television, not only in urban areas. It's necessary to improve the quality in rural areas. We need reduce inequalities in the system, which this pandemic has led birth and accentuate.
Thank you, Minister Angulo. We are at the top of the hour. Please allow me to borrow another 15 minutes of your time with your indulgence. Minister Olstein, followed by Jaime, and then Kevin, you can take us home.
Thank you. As we all agree on, we think that children have a fundamental right to voice their opinions and to be heard, as been discussed now. And I think it's always important that we listen to the concerns of children, and even more so during a crisis. In Norway, we have tried to do our best to listen to children, and I think no one can do enough. We have a lot to learn from others. But just some examples. A few days after we closed down the schools in Norway, our Prime Minister and also other members of the government held a press conference where children could ask questions and share their concerns. And I think that was quite a good start where we involved and engaged children from the very beginning, and also had a press conference that was kind of arranged for children. So that could be something that we can share from our side. So right now we hear the voices of millions of children around the world loud and clear. You want to keep on learning and long for things to get back to normal as soon as possible. And that is why Norway works with other governments, with the UN and a number of organizations that are now doing their utmost to support children so that they can keep on learning. And in order for them to support children in the best possible way, they must also listen to children's concerns, hopes and dreams. So we try, and I think we have some good examples, and I think we need to learn and hear other examples from others. And the most important thing is not to have children like a target group, but actually involve them from the very beginning. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Thank you, Minister Olsten. Jaime, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. In terms of what the World Bank is doing, I want to actually highlight some of the things that we're doing with Colombia and Sierra Leone, right? So we're working very closely with the minister's team and supported her efforts of strengthening the school feeding program, to build much better information systems, right? To support strengthening the professional development of teachers in Sierra Leone. We are working and partnering with Minister Senge, right? Particularly on this ambitious multi-platform approach, right? To remote learning. And in a way, this, I think, shows us how the future is gonna look like. Right? I mean, when we transition first towards a very complex reopening of schools, but then when we go to the more resilient and equitable school that we want, we will need to invest much more in technology, but invest much more in the professional development of our teachers, right? And actually, is that combination of the human factor with technology, right, will allow us to have that hybrid education in which we combine some remote distance, because always there will have to be education that will happen at home, right, which is strengthened education that will have to happen at school, right? So that's where the future is going to be. It's like a continuum where education will have to happen anywhere and at any time. This last year, the World Bank lending on education has had probably the largest amount of lending on education. It's more than $5.2 billion, with which we closed this fiscal year just in July. And many of our operations now are related to this COVID response and to this school of the future that we're looking at. And we're working at this point with 65 countries, both on the lending side and the grant side and on technical assistance, right, to improve their systems. And I just want to close with one issue that Alicia was mentioning, that is what we're doing regarding girls. Yes, we need to work with all children deserve an opportunity, but it's specifically in the case of girls, when we look at the near future, we need to worry about an equitable access to technology, both in terms of how the system is deployed, but in terms of access of technology at home. Because there might be a device at home, but we need to make sure that girls have the same access to that device or has a device separately as a boy would have. Second, we need to make sure that they come back to schools with communications campaigns, with the scholarships to make sure that we don't have high dropout rates among girls. And third, we need to stop violence in schools, right? Gender-based violence at school is something that, unfortunately, right, is a tragedy that we see in many countries, right? So those three are critical issues in which we need to work: technology access, making sure that they're back to school, and making sure that girls are safe at school. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaime. Kevin, take us home.
Thank you, Kajala, and thank you for the brilliant chairing as well. Look, one thing I would say that I've really learned in this job and in life more generally is that children are their own best advocates. And, you know, today we heard from Mali, who is a fantastic advocate for children. One of the things that we're really committed to in Save the Children is to use our organization as a platform for children. You know, when you have people as articulate and thoughtful and creative as Mali, they don't need people like me and others to speak on their behalf. So I'm not going to presume to do that. But what I will say is that I think that Mali and many other children around the world have spoken, and they've given two very clear messages, more diplomatically than I'm about to put them. First message is wake up to world leaders and to governments, and in particular the G20, the major shareholders in the World Bank. As Jaime said, this is a crisis like no other, and we are not going to successfully beat this crisis by using the toolkit from 2008. It needs a distinctive crisis response. And secondly, I think children are saying, do something. You know, we can talk and agree on what the education system of the future should look like. And the way that Jaime set it out was incredibly compelling. But we're not going to get there unless we have a bridge out of this crisis into that better future. And, you know, I would say there are a couple of necessary conditions for building that bridge. The first one is we have to combat child poverty, because if more children fall into poverty and malnutrition, we know the consequences for education. Now, the best way to combat monetary poverty is through more money. And when necessary, to ensure that that money is, that transfer is designed in a way that keeps girls out of early marriage, out of labour markets, and incentivizes parents to give girls a fair chance in school. So social protection is a key part of this agenda. Second thing is, you know, I think in all honesty, we cannot say as an international community that we are dealing with this unprecedented event, you know, the equivalent of the Great Depression and the pandemic of 1919 at the same time, and not rethink how we mobilize resources. Now, you know, rich countries have torn up the fiscal rulebook. They've rewritten monetary policy. They've mobilized 13% of GDP in the fiscal response to this crisis. We have not seen a response equivalent to that for the poorest countries. That is why I think to realize Jaime's vision, we need a supplementary IDA budget of 35 billion, with education a central part of that. We need, as Alicia set out, the international financing facility for education to leverage more resources. And we need private creditors who are taking $16 billion this year out of low-income countries to get off the backs of children and to do the right thing and allow these resources to be put into investments in education, convert debt liability into investment in children. So these are some of the things that are necessary. The report sets out our broader agenda, and I really want to thank all of my colleagues who worked so hard to make that report possible, all of our partners who have worked to make this event possible, you and the others and the speakers as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. We still have so many questions in the chat box and then in the Q&A. We're going to really endeavor to respond to those in the email and the report that we send following this email. We've now come to the end of the session today, and I'm sure you'll all agree it has been truly fascinating and inspiring. I want to thank all our panelists. Marley, thank you. Minister Senge, Minister Angulo, Minister Osteen, Jaime, Kevin, as well as Kamal and Alicia from DFID. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear participants, for all your great questions and comments. You'll see in the chat box and Q&A, we've tried to respond to some in real time as they've been coming in. I hope that you will all continue to have these conversations with your governments and organizations so that together we can really ensure that every child can continue to fulfill their right to quality, safe, and inclusive education during this pandemic and even after, and that together we can endeavor to protect a generation of children. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic evening and see you next time.